Why does it feel like every time Shedeur Sanders steps onto the field, the conversation isn't about what he does, but what people say about him? There's been a wave of criticism surrounding him, questions about his ability, his mindset, even his future in the league. Some voices in the media have been especially loud, pushing strong opinions that have sparked debate among fans. And depending on who you ask, it's starting to feel less like analysis and more like a narrative taking shape. But here, where things get interesting. While all that noise was building, while headlines were focused on doubts and debates, something completely different was happening behind the scenes inside the Cleveland Browns facility. No cameras, no reporters, no outside opinions. Just one moment that may have quietly changed everything. And the craziest part, almost nobody saw it coming. The conversation around Shedeur Sanders hasn't just been loud, it's been everywhere. And what makes it even more interesting is how divided it's become. On one side, you've got critics questioning nearly every part of his game. Some point to advanced stats, others bring up decision-making, and a few have even suggested he hasn't fully proven he can handle the speed of the NFL. These takes have been repeated across shows, articles, and social media, building a narrative that's hard to ignore. But here's the catch: not everyone agrees. There's another group, fans and analysts who have actually followed his journey closely, who see something completely different. They point to his college production, his toughness under pressure, and moments on tape that show real quarterback instincts. To them, the criticism feels exaggerated or at least incomplete. And that's where things start getting complicated. Because once a narrative forms in the NFL, it spreads fast. One opinion turns into a headline, that headline turns into a talking point, and suddenly, what started as a question begins to sound like a conclusion. Now, to be fair, some of these concerns aren't coming out of nowhere. Every young quarterback faces scrutiny, and Shedeur is no exception. But there's also been a growing feeling among supporters that the tone of the conversation has been different, more personal, more persistent. Some have even suggested that certain media figures may already have their stance locked in, that no matter what he shows, the narrative won't shift easily. That's speculation, of course, but the fact that people are saying it shows just how tense the conversation has become. And then there's the impact of all this noise. Because for a young quarterback trying to find his footing, constant doubt can shape perception just as much as performance. It can influence how people watch you, how they judge you, and even how opportunities are viewed when they finally come. Inside the Cleveland Browns, though, the environment is different. Away from the cameras and debates, it's not about hot takes, it's about development, communication, and execution. And while the outside world was busy arguing about what Shedeur is, something inside that building was starting to show what he could be. But that shift didn't happen by accident. It started with a moment nobody outside the facility even knew about. Some of the biggest moments in a player's career don't happen under stadium lights. They happen behind closed doors. And for Shedeur Sanders, one of those moments came long before anyone saw him step onto the field. It started with a quiet meeting. No cameras, no reporters, just Shedeur and his new head coach, Todd Monken, sitting down for the first real conversation that would set the tone for everything that followed. And right away, something felt different. Before any playbooks were opened or schemes discussed, Monken said something that instantly shifted the energy in the room. He told Shedeur they had actually tried to draft him before, that one line carried weight. It wasn't just small talk, it was proof that this wasn't a random pairing. This was a coach who had already studied him, already believed in him, already seen something others might have missed. That changes everything. Because instead of starting from scratch, this relationship already had a foundation. There was respect before the first snap, trust before the first rep, understanding before the first mistake. And then the conversation went deeper. This wasn't one of those generic, work hard and wait your turn speeches. Reports suggest it was more personal, more direct. The kind of message that tells a player, I see how you operate, and I know what you can become. That kind of honesty hits differently, especially for someone who's been surrounded by mixed opinions and constant noise. For Shedeur, it landed. Because when you've spent months hearing doubts, questions, and critiques, hearing someone speak with clarity and belief can shift your entire mindset. It's not just motivation, it's confirmation that you're on the right path. And what made it even more powerful was how natural it felt. There was no awkward introduction phase, no forced chemistry, no period of trying to figure each other out. From the start, it felt like two people already on the same page, speaking the same language, moving toward the same goal. That kind of connection is rare, especially at the quarterback position, where trust between coach and player can define everything, from confidence to performance. But here's the part nobody outside the building realized at the time. That one conversation didn't stay in that room. It showed up almost immediately, in the way Shedeur carried himself, in the way he approached the game, and in the way people around him started to take notice. And what happened next made it impossible to ignore. The moment Shedeur Sanders stepped onto the field for mini camp, something immediately felt different, and it didn't take long for people to notice. It wasn't about a single throw or a highlight play, it was the way he carried himself, calm, controlled, confident, like someone who already knew he belonged there. And that stood out, because this didn't look like a young quarterback trying to prove himself. It didn't look like someone waiting for a chance. It looked like someone stepping into a role he fully expected to own. From the very first reps, the energy was different. His body language told the story before the ball was even snapped. No hesitation, no second guessing. He moved through drills with a level of comfort that suggested everything had slowed down for him. The huddle wasn't overwhelming, it was his space. His voice was clear, his commands were sharp. And coaches picked up on it right away. There's a certain look coaches give when they see something real developing. Not hype, not potential, something tangible. And during those early sessions, that look started appearing more and more on the sidelines. Even the simplest plays carried weight. Short passes, quick reads. Basic timing routes. Nothing flashy, but everything clean. And in the NFL, that matters more than anything. Coaches aren't just watching what happens, they're watching how it happens. Footwork, timing, decision-making, communication, all the details that separate average from reliable. And Shedeur was checking those boxes. But what really made this moment stand out was the contrast. Because this wasn't the version people thought they understood. The narrative had painted him as uncertain, still developing, maybe not quite ready, but what showed up on that field didn't match that at all. This version looked composed, prepared, in control. It felt like something had clicked. There was a rhythm to his game now, a flow that hadn't been there before. He wasn't thinking through every movement, he was reacting naturally, playing instead of processing. And that's when things started to shift internally. Inside the Cleveland Browns facility, people weren't just watching anymore, they were reassessing, quietly but seriously. Because when a quarterback starts carrying himself like that, it changes how everyone sees him. But here, the key question. Where did that confidence come from? Because this kind of shift doesn't just appear overnight. To understand it, you have to look back at what things felt like before all of this. Before this version of Shedeur Sanders ever showed up on that practice field, the situation inside the Cleveland Browns looked very different, and not in a dramatic, headline-grabbing way. It was more subtle than that. It was about fit. Under Kevin Stefanski, the Browns had structure, they had discipline, they had a system that worked, and results that backed it up. Stefanski brought stability to a franchise that had struggled for years. That part is undeniable. But when it came to Shedeur, something just didn't fully connect. Now, depending on who you listen to, there are different interpretations. Some reports suggested there may have been a disconnect, not necessarily conflict, but a lack of full alignment between how Shedeur learns and how the system was being delivered. Others pointed to how reps were distributed early on, with multiple quarterbacks rotating and competing, which made it harder for any one player to settle into a rhythm. To be clear, that's normal in the NFL. Competition is expected. But for a young quarterback, rhythm matters. And at times, it felt like Shedeur was stuck in between, talented enough to compete, but not fully trusted enough to take control. That's a difficult position to develop from, because growth at quarterback isn't just about learning plays, it's about confidence, communication, and consistency. And when those pieces don't fully line up, progress can feel slower than it actually is. There were stretches where it seemed like he was waiting for more reps, waiting for clarity, waiting for that real opportunity to show what he could do in a structured, consistent role. And while he stayed ready, kept working, stayed focused, the situation didn't always allow him to play freely. Instead of building momentum, it felt like he was managing uncertainty. And that can quietly affect everything. Timing becomes tighter, decisions feel heavier, you start thinking instead of reacting, not because the ability isn't there, but because the environment hasn't fully unlocked it yet. Some observers even suggested that other quarterbacks in the room may have had earlier opportunities to establish themselves. Again, that's part of competition, but it added to the perception that Shedeur was still on the outside looking in. And perception matters. Because once people start seeing you as not quite there yet, it can shape how every rep is judged. But here, the key point. This wasn't about a lack of talent, it wasn't about effort. It was about connection. And for a player like Shedeur, who thrives on communication, trust, and understanding, that missing piece may have been bigger than anyone realized. Because when a quarterback builds through relationships, even a small gap can feel like a wall. And for a while, that wall was there. But not for long. The shift didn't come from a new playbook or a flashy announcement. It started with something simple, but powerful enough to change everything. The moment Todd Monken approached Shedeur Sanders on day one and hugged him. Not a quick handshake, not a formal greeting, a real, genuine moment. That might seem small from the outside, but inside a locker room, those details matter, because they set the tone immediately. This wasn't going to be a distant, strictly business relationship. This was going to be built on trust. And then came the conversation. Monken casually mentioned that he had liked Shedeur long before he ever got to Cleveland, that he had studied him, believed in him, and saw something others might have overlooked. That kind of statement doesn't just build confidence, it creates alignment. Suddenly, this wasn't a player trying to prove himself to a coach. It was a coach who already believed in the player. That flips everything. There was no adjustment phase, no awkward period of trying to build chemistry. From the very beginning, it felt natural, like both sides already understood each other. The communication was smoother, the energy was different. And people inside the Cleveland Browns building started noticing it quickly. Conversations between them didn't feel rushed or surface level. They felt intentional, focused, like every interaction had purpose. And that's where real development happens, not just on the field, but in the spaces where trust is built. Because once a quarterback feels that kind of connection, everything changes. The game slows down, the pressure becomes manageable, confidence stops being something you force, it becomes something you carry naturally. And that's exactly what started happening with Shedeur. He wasn't just going through the motions anymore. He was engaging, asking questions, spending extra time, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And that's a different level of commitment. At the same time, Monken wasn't trying to force him into a rigid system. Instead, it felt like he was adjusting the approach, communicating in a way that matched how Shedeur learns and processes the game. That's rare. A lot of coaches expect players to adapt to them, But here, it felt like the process was meeting in the middle, and that's where real growth starts. Because when a player feels understood, they play faster, freer, more confidently. And slowly, that belief started turning into something bigger. Not just improvement, not just progress, but momentum. And once that kind of energy builds inside a team, what happens next can change everything. Then came the moment that quietly changed everything. Not in front of cameras, not during a game, but in a conversation that hit deeper than football. At some point during the off-season, Todd Monken sat down with Shedeur Sanders and delivered a message that wasn't complicated, but it was powerful. If you want to become great, it can't be something you turn on and off. It has to be every day, every rep, every detail, no shortcuts. Simple words, but the timing and the delivery made them land differently. Because this wasn't coming from someone just filling a coaching role. This was coming from someone who already believed in him. Someone who had taken the time to understand how he thinks, how he learns, and what drives him. And that's what made it stick. For Shedeur, this wasn't just advice, it was clarity. Suddenly, everything started lining up. The work became more intentional. The focus sharpened. The small details that separate average from elite started becoming part of his daily routine, not just something he thought about occasionally. And that's when the shift really happened. Around the same time, there were small signs that showed how serious this connection had become. One of the most talked about moments, the birthday gift. Instead of something generic, Shedeur gave Monken a porcelain horse head, something thoughtful, something specific. That detail mattered because it showed attention, awareness, effort beyond football. It reflected a relationship that had already moved past surface level. This wasn't just player and coach anymore, it was mutual respect. And then there were the office visits. Not required, not scheduled, just showing up. Asking questions, breaking down film, talking through situations, spending extra time not because he had to, but because he wanted to get better. That's where growth really happens, in those quiet moments nobody sees. And here's what makes this even more important. Shedeur has always been open about how he learns best, not just through playbooks or diagrams, but through connection, through conversation, through understanding the why behind what he's doing. So when he finally had a coach willing to meet him at that level, it unlocked something. This wasn't about forcing himself into a system anymore. It was about building within one that actually fit him. And once that clicked, everything started to feel more natural. The work didn't feel forced. The progress didn't feel slow. It felt consistent. It felt real. That's when it turned into something more than just effort. More than just improvement. It became a mindset. And once that mindset takes over, the results aren't far behind. And then came the moment where everything people had been hearing behind the scenes finally became visible. Not in a headline, not in a rumor, but on the field. When Shedeur Sanders walked into mini camp, one detail instantly stood out: the jersey. Number 12 was gone, number 2 was back. And that wasn't just a number change. That was identity. Because number 2 represents who he was before all the noise, before the draft questions, before the constant debates. It's the version of him that played freely, confidently, and without hesitation. So when he stepped out wearing it again, it wasn't about style, it was a statement. And everything that followed backed it up. From the first few reps, the difference was clear. The command in the huddle felt natural, his voice carried, his presence wasn't forced, it was expected. Teammates responded to it, coaches noticed it. And the biggest shift, he wasn't reacting anymore. He was controlling. Pre-snap reads looked sharper, adjustments came quicker. The offense moved with better rhythm when he was under center. These aren't flashy things, but inside the Cleveland Browns facility, they matter more than highlight plays. Because that's how coaches evaluate quarterbacks. Then came one of the most telling moments of camp. During a drill, a route was run incorrectly, leading to a breakdown in the play. Instead of staying quiet or brushing it off, Shedeur addressed it immediately, right there, no hesitation, no overreaction, just clear, direct communication. That's leadership. Not loud for attention, not emotional for show, just setting the standard. And that's when the perception really started to shift internally. Because that's not how a backup carries himself. That's not how a player unsure of his role responds. That's how a quarterback leads. Even physically, the changes were noticeable. Reports and observations suggested he looked stronger, more explosive, more confident in how he moved. And that kind of growth doesn't happen overnight. It's the result of consistent work behind the scenes. But the biggest difference wasn't physical or technical. It was belief. Because now, instead of trying to prove he belongs, it looked like he already knew he did. And once a quarterback reaches that level of confidence, everything around him starts to change. Which leads to the biggest question yet. If this is who Shedeur Sanders really is, why didn't everyone see it sooner? At some point, every player reaches a moment where the narrative either sticks or completely falls apart. And right now, Shedeur Sanders is standing right in that space. Because this isn't just about potential anymore. For the longest time, the conversation around him was filled with questions. Can he process fast enough? Can he lead at this level? Is he really ready? Those doubts didn't come from nowhere, but they also didn't tell the full story. And now, that story is starting to change. Inside the Cleveland Browns building, what people are seeing isn't uncertainty, it's growth. It's confidence. It's command. The kind that doesn't come from hype or headlines, but from real work, real connection, and the right environment. And that might be the biggest difference of all. Because when you look at everything that's happened, the shift in mindset, the relationship with Todd Monken, the way he's carrying himself on the field, it starts to raise a different kind of question. What if the issue was never his ability? What if it was always about fit? That idea has been gaining traction. Some observers have even suggested that once a quarterback finds the right system and the right voice, everything can change quickly. And while that's still being proven, the early signs are hard to ignore. This no longer feels like a long-term project. It feels like something building right now. And if that continues, if the confidence keeps growing, if the leadership keeps showing, if the connection with his coach keeps strengthening, then this won't just be a development story anymore. It becomes a breakout. The kind that forces people to look back and rethink everything they said before. And maybe that's the real twist here. Not that Shedeur Sanders suddenly became a different player, but that he might have been this version all along, just waiting for the right moment, the right system, and the right belief to bring it out. Which leaves one final question hanging. Did the league actually miss on him? Or did they just misunderstand him until it was already too late?